Hello, my friends. Luiz Lima here. Welcome once again to Kardec Radio. And you are watching our weekly program, Spiritism, A Closer Look. We broadcast every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight's topic is a part two of something that we did before. So I'm going to call it Society and Moral Values, part two. We did Society and Moral Values a few weeks ago. So this part two is going to address a little bit more details on part of what we spoke about last time. So here we go. Let's just align our thoughts. Last time we spoke about the society changing its moral values. So we don't use moral values that came from divine source anymore in our societies. Most of our societies throughout the world are driven by false, I would say, moral values, meaning values that were created by us, men, people, and nothing to do with uh, divinity, God, whatever belief system you are. So everything changed. That's what we addressed on part one, society and moral values. Here on part two, we're going to take a look at how this thing developed, how this thing came about. So we are going to start way in the past. Like go back, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 thousand years ago, before Abraham. What did we have in those days? We had paganism. There was, the religion, their belief system. That's what life worked around. Paganism. What is paganism? Let's just define so we are all on the same page here. Paganism is a belief system in which you have certain objects of idolatry and you have to worship those things. What are these objects of idolatry? There's several of them. So some examples. The sun, the sea, the earth, the moon, the winds, the mountains, the rocks. There are several of these objects of idolatry. In order to sustain this belief system in which these objects are objects of idolatry, mostly seen as gods. So for pagans, there's a god of the sun, another god of the sea, which is different, and another different one, god of the moon and god of the earth and the wind. And so these are different gods. And you worship these gods. So they are objects of idolatry that you worship. In order to sustain this throughout times, rituals were created. These rituals include meetings, for example, group meetings, parties, and sacrifices. What kind of sacrifices are we talking about here? Again, we are 4 or 5 thousand years ago, all right? Well, mostly sacrifices are submission to God or divinity, some sort of divinity. It's a submission. It's a worship and a submission to the divinity. Those were the sacrifices. So again, paganism. Number one, objects of idolatry. Number two, rituals. Number three, sacrifices. Spirit Viana de Carvalho explains to us that the society that we are in today, and no matter where you are, what country you are, it doesn't matter. Like I mentioned this before. Current society has the same three things: objects of idolatry, rituals, and sacrifices. However, the objects of idolatry are not the same. They used to be the sun, the moon, the earth, the wind, the mountain. Now they are five of them, the main ones, five. money, power, sex, drugs, and weapons. Those things drive our lives because we are supposed to see them as objects of idolatry. So money and power, sex, drugs, and weapons, these are the current objects of idolatry. The same way that the original pagans established rituals, which were parties and meetings and sacrifices, we do the same today. However, our rituals are not parties and meetings. They are fashion. They are brands, name brands. We have to wear or to carry a certain brand. Those are the rituals that we do. So when you're gonna buy something, a phone, for example, it has to have a particular name brand. Otherwise, you won't buy because you subscribe blindly almost to that brand for some reason. And sacrifices are still present. However, they are not the same as before. They used to be sacrifices in submission to God, to a divinity. Now they are sacrifices in which we become slaves to wealth and power. We do sacrifices, we do everything for those things. We become slaves of wealth and power. We live for them and nothing else. That makes us very small. Live only for two things, that makes us very small. So this is what the Spirit, Viana de Carvalho, explains to us. And then he says, with this in mind, I'm going to tell you more, which now it becomes really interesting. So he says, these and this new society, these new things, he calls the neo-paganism. So 4,000 years ago, we had paganism. Today, what we have is neo-paganism. So a new paganism, form of paganism. And he says this new paganism leads to three things. Number one, moral bankruptcy. Moral bankruptcy. What is that? Moral bankruptcy is we don't care for ethical matters anymore. We don't care for anything ethical. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's not important. It's gone, disappeared. It's a thing of the past. So the things we do in modern society are no longer driven or they do no longer support ethics. It just doesn't matter anymore. So that's the number one thing that he says neo-paganism has led us to. Number two, and I like this expression. Those are his words, not mine, by the way. Number two, material immortality. Let me try to explain what this means. For those who subscribe to the materialistic paradigm, matter is the only thing that matters. There is no spirit, there's no soul, there's no afterlife, nothing like this. You die, end of it, and that's it. There's only one life, and that's it. So if you subscribe to this, happiness automatically becomes, or happiness arrives when you have more possessions, when you have more things, when you are able to gather more matter or material things. That's what's going to define happiness for you. So when I'm able to buy this particular product, I'm going to be happier. Not necessarily happy, absolute, but I'll be happier. Then I got the product. Then now I have to seek another product. When I got the next product, I'm going to be happier than before. And that's a continuous way of seeing happiness. So happiness for the materialistic, those who subscribe to the materialistic paradigm, it attaches to possessions. So what Spirit Viana de Carvalho says is, if you attach happiness to everything material, just as an example, please understand, the matter is infinite in this universe. But just as an example, let's say that all the matter in the world fits the size of your table, for example. There it is, the size of your table. So you're sitting at the table, you're the king of the world because you have all the matter. So you are happy, 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 according to the materialistic paradigm. Now, what happens if somebody goes to the corner of your table and chips a little bit, a tiny chip like this, takes it out? Then somebody else goes to another part of the table and takes another chip. And it goes like this. So they start fragmenting in small, tiny, tiny, tiny little pieces your happiness, meaning your full table. So what happened? At one point, you're going to say, hey, hold on, hold on, hold on. I'm being less happy every day because people are chipping my table. That's not right. That's wrong. I'm becoming unhappy little by little, but I'm becoming unhappy. So what do? I react to that. How do I react to that? The easiest way within that paradigm is to eliminate the people who chipped my table. Plain simple. I know it's unfortunate, right? What a way of thinking. Why do you think that massive shooting in schools takes place? Why? Because whoever does that think that the presence of those kids makes them unhappy. Those kids are taking happiness away from him, from her. So that was number two. Number one, moral bankruptcy. Number two, material immortality. Number three, spiritual strabism. Strabism is that condition in the eye that they don't see straight. You have one eye kind of pointing here, the other eye pointing here. So it's very difficult for these people to see. So they have a hard time to look at certain things and see it. And he explains what this is. What is that? Number one, he gives us some examples. Death penalty. Death penalty is one of these things that's under discussion in our society. It's been forever and ever. So at times, somebody is put to death. Here in the US, for example, in one of the states. It becomes national news. It raises to the national level. It goes on the news for 2 days, 3 days, maybe 5 days, if that much, if that long. And it disappears. So the problem is there, yeah, but let's not kind of look at it. Let's keep going with our lives. That's what he's saying. We're not looking at it. We don't want to look at it. Another one of those scandals. Scandals are here for a reason, and this is explained in the gospel for according to Spiritism. Scandals are here to reveal what's wrong with our society, but we have to look at them and make use of those scandals in our favor. We don't do that. Scandals goes on the news for 2 3 days, they disappear. Next time, 6 months later, they come back again, they show up again on the news. Another one, abortion. It's the same as death penalty. It goes on the news for 2 3 4 5 days when something happens somewhere in a clinic, and then we discuss, we debate, and we argue, and it goes away. And it keeps going and going and going. And another one, weapons of massive destruction, weapons of mass destruction. So those are things that come and go. We know they are part of our society, but we don't want to look at them. We kind of, take our eyes away from it, so we don't have to deal with that. So this is our modern society. And then he says, when you combine, number one, moral bankruptcy. Number two, material immortality. Number three, spiritual strabism. It takes us to a dangerous, set of values in our society, which I called on the original program that we did, part one, adjusted moral values. And those are values that our society goes by. Number one, everybody does. Everybody does doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that the level of complicity is high. That's all it is. Everybody does not in any way measure morality. Not at all. There is no relation between everybody does and measuring morality. So everybody does. Okay, so everybody can do something that is not right, and the society goes by it. It inherits those values and they become social values. So now I can do this because everybody does. And if it goes against one of the moral values, it doesn't really matter. Everybody does. So that's one of the adjusted moral values. Here's another one. To be the best always, to do the best you can always. And we all want to do that. That's part of us. When we do something, we want to do the best we can. However, we do this at whatever the cost is. And that's a problem. Because let's say, for example, I want to do something. It could be my profession, whatever it is. I want to do my profession the best I can. And I go better every day. I get better. Years go by. I get better, more experience, more knowledge, and so on and so on. So, but then I get to a level where there's, let's say, to make it easy, let's say there's 10 people that are better than I am, and I cannot pass those people in terms of performance, knowledge. I just can't beat them. They're always above me. So at one point, I want to be the best. What do I have to do to be the best? If I already studied everything I could, if I already did everything I could, well, I have to eliminate these people. It's sad to say, but that's neo paganism. I have to eliminate these people. If the society sustains and support that, it's going to keep happening and happening and happening. So now I've eliminated these people and I'm the best. But at what cost? Where are the moral values? Where is ethics here? It's set aside, it's left alone, drifted apart. All right? So here's another one. Possess more than others. That's a typical materialistic society. Possess possessions. Remember the table, all the matter in the world. I want it all. Possess more than others is something that our society goes by and we subscribe to. So it becomes complicated because there's a limit. I cannot get everything, possess more than others. There's going to be a point where there's always going to be somebody that has more than I do. So I'm always going to be in conflict because I don't possess more than this guy, that person. And it's going to create a problem in the society because it creates a fierce competition with no ethics. Remember, ethics is behind. There's no ethics in neo-paganism. Here's another one. Demonstration of superiority. I have to demonstrate by the social standards. I have to demonstrate, or I'm forced to, or encouraged to, let's put it this way, demonstrate superiority. So what do? Bullying, which is a very typical form of demonstration or attempt to demonstrate my superiority. Not necessarily works, but it's an attempt. So we go into bullying and things like that because the society, the neo-paganist society, calls for that. And if I subscribe to these things, I'm going to be doing those things. And I'm going to be even further from the moral values, the true moral values. I'm going to be working with adjusted moral values that somebody created. Somebody had the idea to create, and I just subscribe to it. So we go from a paganism type of belief system to a neo-paganism type of belief system. Unfortunately, but that's what it is. Those objects of idolatry, money, power, sex, drugs, and weapons, they are part of our lives, in our societies, all of them. We want more money at all costs. We want power at all costs. Somebody goes in power, we don't like him, we take him down. We eliminate them, not take them down. In the sense of replacing them with a voting or something like that, elections. No, we just eliminate that person. And same for weapons, sex, and drugs. It's all the same. It's a concept. So whatever the object of idolatry is, it doesn't matter because the concept is all the same. It's all wrong. And then I ask, how did it happen? How did we get into a neo-paganist society, aka materialistic society? How did we get into that? Well, let's do a brief 3-minute, 4-minute pass on history here. So going back to paganism, go back to 4000 BC, before Abraham. So what do we have? Paganism. We already spoke enough about it. So all those gods and so and so. In the year 2000 BC, approximate, Abraham comes on board and he establishes something that goes in contrast with paganism. It's called monotheism, in which you don't have these many gods anymore. Those, the sun, the rocks, the moon, and so they become different expressions of the same one God, monotheism. And then after Abraham, about, I would say, 600 years after that, Judaism becomes well established with Moses. That's about 1400 BC. So Judaism starts, which is under monotheism. And then we have Jesus, about year or after Jesus, after 33 more or less, Common Era. Christianity is born. And then on 622, Islam comes on board. And you see, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all, they all have the same origin, which is monotheism, but they are different segments of the same thing. In 1510, Martin Luther rebels against the church because they were selling indulgences outside the churches, and he said, "This is nowhere in the Gospels. This is not in the New Testament. This is crazy. You're doing something wrong." So he revolts, protests, and Protestantism is born right there, 1510. So until 1510, until actually in the 1800s, religion predominates over anything science, which doesn't even exist as we know it today. So the church was the provider of the truth. You wanted to know something, ask the priest. But you see, with time, we were asking the same questions over and over again, century after century, and we were not getting the answers. The answers that we were getting were not satisfying our needs. For example, one guy in the early 1800s called Dalton, he was experimenting with atoms. He was studying atoms. He was a scientist. And he would just challenge the church real big. He would say, "Listen, you're telling me that the world was created in 6 days or 7 days, depends on how you interpret. Let's just say 6 days. Created in 6 days. And There's no evolution. A man was created a man from the get-go, a giraffe, a monkey, and so he asks the church, in which day was the giraffe born or created? And the church would know. They would reply with, this is not something you ask. And they would use this answer for all the questions we had for centuries and centuries. So they were not responding or addressing the questions that we had. So what happens is in 1859, Charles Darwin brings his work, The Origin of the Species. We're not going to go too much into his work, but with his work, some of the questions that we had would now have an answer. So the answers to the questions that we had for centuries start to show up. And then what happens here? The science takes over from the church the ability to be the provider of the truth. So with the works of Charles Darwin, the science takes over. So science it still is the provider of the truth. Even for us spiritists. How many times we say, oh, I hope science proves the existence of God or the spirit. That's us playing materialistic. We still go by the fact that science is still the current provider of the truth. So that starts in 1859, a few years after that, though. In 1953, something happens that changes everything. Two scientists, John Watson and Francis Crick, right here in New York, in the US, they discover the structure of the DNA. With that, they establish a dogma. Strange, right? A dogma from science, that's what they called dogma in 1953. And the dogma is genes cannot be changed. Our genetic code, our DNA cannot be changed. So if you tell me that my DNA cannot change and my DNA, my genes, are also responsible not for only my physical appearance and characteristics, but also for my behavior, that's a problem, because what you're telling me is if you are born aggressive, you're going to be aggressive till the day you die. You don't have to do anything. It's useless to do some sort of trying to get better. That's what we bought. That's what we subscribe to. Being victims of our own DNA. We subscribe to that. And the society today evolves around that. I'm victim of something. So there is no need to accept responsibility. Everybody does, I'm going to do too. Oh, yeah. What is that? It's the same. I'm not being responsible. Hold on, everybody does. But this is not right. I'm not doing it. That's responsibility. So you see how things got twisted. So because we are on a very materialistic society, the values of this society are not the same values that were brought to us with Moses and Jesus, and throughout time with Spiritism explaining everything. If we subscribe to a materialistic society or behavior, even in part, we are subscribers of the new paganism. Neo-paganism. That's the name that Spirit Viana de Carvalho does to explain all of this thing. This is part 2. I encourage you to look at part 1 if you haven't. Society and moral values. We might be doing more programs on the same subject in the future, because this is a long subject. There's a lot of things that we would like to detail a little more. So look out for it. It's gonna turn up one day. So thank you very much for participating with us tonight. We will be here next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Spiritism, a closer look on Kardec Radio.